Just a couple of brief items. I'll be ducking out probably about 1:15 or so. We had discussed at your retreat this year and last year the idea of connecting with City Council to brainstorm ways to strengthen ties with the Planning Commission and the City Council. The plan we had for initiating that would be for the leadership here, the chair and co-chair chair and vice chair to meet together with the Mayor Dennis and the council president this year, Alan Zelenka. And that meeting has been scheduled, and it'll happen in mid-February. So I think it's the 17th is when that's scheduled. So that is in the works. So I'm looking forward to that and curious what's going to come out of that. The other item is recruitment. So I believe we have 2 positions opening up this year, Commissioner Mills and also Commissioner Borofsky. So we are going to be recruiting for those positions. And last year, I know that recruitment was one of those items on the list from the retreat that we really wanted to beat the bushes and try to get some folks out there with interest. And so we're going to do that. I think Alyssa's heading that up again this year. Did a really good job last year, actually. There were a lot of fresh, qualified applicants in that pool. So we're hoping for good things. And we could really use your help. I think commissioners are some of the best recruiters that we have. So if you have any ideas about folks who you think would be great commissioners, or if you yourselves are interested in reapplying, of course, we'll be looking at that, but please ask around. And if there's anything else that we can do, looking at Alyssa, just check in with her. And there's quite a bit of information that we sent out last year.
A question for you, Robin. When you have applicants from the previous time, do you then, when this comes up, go back and recontact them if they,
Yeah, yes. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a perfect starting point.
Yeah.
So folks who've already expressed interest, we're definitely going to reach out to them.
Good.
I believe that's it.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Are we going to do the stuff from commission now as well?
No, I was just going to do that part. So thank you. The rest of agenda items under agenda item number 5 will wait till the end. Agenda item number 2 is action final order for Chimoti Trails PUD remand, and Eric Berg-Johnson is here on behalf of staff to give a summary. Yes. Sorry, hang on, we've got Robin.
Do you mind if I interrupt just briefly? One more quick little item from staff is that Ann Davies, who's been our legal counsel for quite a number of years for Planning Commission, has moved on from the city of Eugene. And we have Emily Jerome here as our legal counsel filling in. So I just thought I'd let everyone know that if you hadn't heard that already.
All right.
Thank you.
So on Chimoti, it makes sense that I kind of provide the summary of what you're here for today, because it's more of a legal matter than anything at this point. The LUBA decision in this case, as you know, was a reversal, not a remand, which carries with it a pretty clear directive to the Planning Commission. When LUBA reverses, they are technically saying that there's no legal basis to do anything but what they are saying, and they have said that you need to approve this application. And for those who are listening, that's because it was denied on only one basis, and that basis was overturned by LUBA. With that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but that's all I need.
Eric, did you want to add anything?
I mean, I'll just remind everyone that I think all the commissioners here today were part of this, but just for the public, it was reversed based on the 19 lot rule, which was one of the main questions that you talked about during your deliberations, and that was talking about vehicle access, to and from the PUD, and whether or not, the traffic is dispersed. There was a lot of talk about dispersal of traffic, and basically LUBA, Emily can correct me if I'm wrong, but basically what they found and agreed with was the applicant's argument that there was more than one reading of that, therefore it's not a clear and objective standard, and that's why LUBA felt that it was appropriate to reverse the decision. So.
Great. So I wanted to go to discussion questions, and from the AIS, you'll see that there's an attachment A, and that's the draft final order. That's our next steps today, is to basically make sure that we have a final order, and then final action for the final order. Okay, discussions, questions. I have Commissioner Borofsky.
Yeah, I think the discussion that I had was just, I hope that going forward, we'll take this and look at it. We've had other appeal issues and areas in our codes that have come back to us on remand, and that we hopefully will adjust when we start looking at the needed housing and clear and objective standards after, it's on the work plan for after we adopt the UGB, hopefully. So I just hope that there's a way that we can look at that in the future, because I think there's concern on both sides. This is, right now, it's not clear and objective, which was, told to us by by LUBA, but also there's people who have neighborhoods and don't want, huge subdivisions on a piece of transportation that's not suited for it. So looking at it in the future and trying to figure out the best way to accommodate both of those would be, I think, in the city's best interest.
Any other questions, comments? And does anyone want to make a motion for the final order?
So moved. Do you want more than that, or just, I move that we approve the final order per attachment A.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? It's unanimous, and there are 5 people present, 5 commissioners present. And that is a quorum. So we're going to move to agenda item 3. So the agenda item 3 is work session UGB adoption package. And I just want to briefly, before we invite staff up to go over this, today's discussion is really about staff giving us an explanation of the process. Today is not really intended to discuss content, and staff will go over that, so just keep that in mind. So if we have specific content suggestions, etc., questions, what I'm going to do is just remind you that that is at a future Planning Commission meeting. Okay, we've got staff members Terry Harding and Emily Jerome.
Thank you. I'm going to pass out a copy of the PowerPoint and another document to the commissioners. Just take one of those and pass them around. I have some for the public here too. There's 3 in that stack. Thanks.
You were short on staples? Is that,
Yeah, I was saving
budgetary?
staples.
I know, saving them out.
Yeah.
Thank you for your
Yeah.
thoughtfulness.
Uh-huh. So thanks, Kristen, for the introduction. So today we're going to give you a pretty brief how did we get here discussion of the community process for Envision Eugene. And then Emily is going to walk the commission through the urban growth boundary adoption process from the legal framework point of view. And then we'll talk about the community engagement plan for this phase of the project and wrap up with next steps.
Can I ask you,
Sure.
sorry to just interrupt for a quick second, can you just give also an update on the City Council's decision?
Sure, yeah, that is relevant and recent. The council held a work session on the urban growth boundary adoption package last Wednesday, January 18th, and they took action at the end of the meeting to approve the timeline for the project going forward, timeline and process, and also to approve the community engagement plan that I'll be showing you the highlights of today. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to jump in. But when we get to the discussion part, we can talk more about that. Okay. So for the commission and the public who might be watching, the urban growth boundary is one piece of a bigger project called Envision Eugene, which kicked off with a community visioning phase of work. And the community visioning really resulted in the creation of the 7 pillars of Envision Eugene. And they're listed on the slide here. They can be thought of as community values or principles as we grow. These are the things that we want to focus on. So they include providing ample economic opportunities for everyone, providing affordable housing options for all income levels, planning for climate change and energy resiliency, promoting compact development and efficient transportation, a focus on neighborhood livability, also natural resources, and flexible implementation. So these are sort of the guiding principles or values for all of the work that's done under Envision Eugene. This is the map that accompanied those pillars from 2012, and the things to really take away from this map are that the community stated a preference for focusing our growth and new development in the downtown and along our key transit corridors, key transportation corridors in the community. So those are shown on the map with downtown in the center with the red blob. And the key transportation corridors sort of radiate out from the downtown along the yellow highlighting. So there are streets like West 11th and Highway 99, River Road, Coburg Road, South Willamette Street, and Franklin Boulevard. And the idea here is to integrate our transportation and land use planning to accommodate our growth focused in those areas. And at the same time, you can see that a lot of the map is the light cream color, and those are neighborhoods. Single-family neighborhoods with a variety of assets and amenities in them. So there's another concept we talk about a lot with the community vision, and that's the concept of 20-minute neighborhoods, where people can have a place to live that is close to the things they need to do every day: parks, schools, grocery shopping, and things like that. So with that as a framework, I'll tell you a little bit about the timeline that's gotten us here. There's this graphic which sort of walks you through community visioning on the left. Let's see if I have a pointer, or I can just use my arrow. Community visioning starting here in 2010, progressing over through strategy refinement and the pillars document being published in 2012. Then we went through a period of work where the city tried to come up with actions that would enable us to fit more jobs and housing inside the existing urban growth boundary. Those are called efficiency measures, and those were adopted by the council, 5 different ones in 2014 and 2015. We spent the last year refining our strategies for multifamily housing. After the South Willamette plan was discussed, and at the council level, we were given direction to look for alternative ways to accommodate our remaining multifamily housing need. And that culminated with the council direction just this last October. And the strategies that were selected focus more high-density housing in the downtown and increase the minimum density slightly in our existing multifamily areas. So that brings us to where we are today with this little bubble. We are here on the brink of our formal adoption process, which is the next slide. So this is sort of how we got to where we are. And we'll talk next about where we're going and the process that we'll use to get to the finish line, really, so we can implement this plan. I know this is hard to see on the screen. This is on our website, envisioneugene.org, and also in your packet. The timeline going forward is a series of meetings with planning commissions. You all and our partners at Lane County will be having work sessions and then ultimately public hearings on the UGB proposal in March. Emily's going to go into this in a little bit more detail, but I did want to highlight on this slide that the community information sessions are in the green bar at the top. Those have already started. We started with a meeting at South Eugene High School last Thursday, and they'll be continuing up through February 9th. And again, all of the dates and locations are on envisioneugene.org. So when you conclude your work in April, you'll have a recommendation on the urban growth boundary package, and you will forward that recommendation to the decision-making bodies. And that's the second half of the process that would happen from May through July. One more note about timeline before I hand this over to Emily. And I'm going to reference the handout that I gave you that looks like this. This is the Envision Eugene decision process document. It's also on our website. And what this one does is walk you through the decision points that have been made already by our city council in a cumulative way towards the urban growth boundary documents that we're now going to be considering. And part of the point of this document is to show that there are certain actions and data points that are foundational to the urban growth boundary process. They include things like the population forecast, the employment growth rate, things that really are a starting point for the analysis, and they build on that. Over the last several years, Council has made incremental decisions on a number of these things and provided staff with direction on how to put together the overall EGB package. So I wanted to call your attention to this document and also provide a reference point for Emily to reference back to when she talks to you about the nature of the process as it comes forward, given that we've been in it for a certain amount of time. So with that as a foundation, we'll go into Emily's piece.
I need a quick driving instruction here.
Okay, you can use the down arrow. Yeah.
Okay. So, as you heard from Terry, last Wednesday, the council approved a timeline and a process. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
you got to use the mic.
So last Wednesday, council approved a timeline and a process that will begin very shortly with you all and would lead the council to the ability to take final action before their break in July. So today we're going to orient you a little bit with the process and a little bit on the kind of a high-level once-over of the legal framework for the materials that you're going to be seeing as part of the process. As you know, we've talked a lot about the basis for the action that you're about to take. It kind of started in 2007 when the state legislature told Eugene and Springfield that they needed to take what had been a shared regional urban growth boundary and divide it into two, establishing two separate urban growth boundaries with I-5 as the dividing line. So in order to do that, the cities have to follow sort of a very rigid state process for establishing an urban growth boundary and, where necessary, adding new land into an urban growth boundary. Primarily, the goal is to ensure that when that urban growth boundary is established, we have studies that demonstrate that the land within that urban growth boundary contains a supply that's sufficient to meet Eugene's 20-year needs for employment land, park land, school land, and residential land. Over the several years that Eugene's been addressing this, it has been, we've developed sort of two packages for the Planning Commission and the Council to consider. The first package addresses the Eugene urban growth boundary in terms of it establishing the Eugene urban growth boundary, and it takes care of the needs that we have to add land for. So that's employment, parks, and schools, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But this first package is the one that establishes the urban growth boundary and takes the actions necessary to bring some additional areas in. The second package addresses residential land needs. The process that Council has approved would take both of those packages through the Planning Commission and the Council on the same timeline, so that they are poised to act on both of these packages at the same time before their break. The first package is the employment land supply study, the main part of the first package is this employment land supply study. So as I told you, this package, or as I like to call it, ordinance, these are basically two separate ordinances with lots and lots of exhibits and attachments. This first ordinance addresses employment, parks, and schools. Because the jobs piece of it is much more robust, there's a lot more to it. I'm going to talk mostly about that today, but I'll kind of sprinkle in a little bit of info for you on parks and schools as well. The focus is on this employment land supply study because it, in each one of its parts, or you might call them chapters, we call them parts, there's a specific element of state law addressed. The first element that we address in the employment land study, the first part, is the 2012 land supply. So the City Council has struggled mightily over a few different periods of time and several work sessions about the 2012 year, as you know. A 20-year supply in almost every city that's done this ends up being a 20-year supply that you're part of the way into when you adopt, because it takes so long to conduct the studies. It's troubling to a lot of people in the community that our study starts in 2012 and ends in 2032, because here we are in 2017. However, state law recognizes that this process is, it requires so much of cities that you're pretty much never going to get an urban growth boundary adopted with a 20-year supply that follows that period, or it coincides with that period. So the council has said, and recently again, although there are newer estimates for population that relate to newer time periods, we are basing all of our studies on the 2012 to 2032 time period. So part one says, what did we have in 2012? And it inventories the land that was available, in this case for employment, in that year. The next part, part two, did I say part two earlier? Okay, so part one's 2012 land supply. Part two is the 2032 demand. So in other words, we have a supply. Is it enough? How much are we going to need by 2032? So in terms of employment, this is one of those things that Terry brought up. The council decided, after much study, that they would like to see a proposal that includes a 1.4% growth rate from what we've been having in the city moving forward through the 20 years. It just so happens that a 1.4% growth rate is also a safe harbor under state law, which I like. What that means is that although it can be challenged, the state is bound to be okay with that percentage. So applying a 1.4% job growth rate, we come up with a demand for land in 2032. The studies also have to, of course, determine how much employment can go on that land that we have in 2012. And they do so by applying different capacities for different sorts of land and employment. So what we end up with is a determination of how much land we have, how much land we need, and we also have to look at other demands on the land, not just what we're going to need for employment uses, but we all know that, for example, there are public uses, like a new facility for eWeb that we may need to put on employment land. And so in order to be more accurate, part three of the study looks at what else is going to have to be supported on that land to make sure that we are actually getting the right capacity. We do the math and we determine that our 2012 supply compared to our 2032 demand, our supply is insufficient. And the study does the math and explains that, and that is why between 2014 and 2015, you and the City Council did take those efficiency measures to try to do what we could to increase the capacity of the land that we had in 2012, to see how much of that demand we could actually meet through reasonable measures on land already within the UGB. And those are laid out and addressed in the next part, efficiency measures for commercial and industrial land. So the study, in its part 4, lists those, talks about what we did as a community. Those actions have already been taken and acknowledged, and we assigned a certain amount of capacity that came out of those actions. So we have to do the math again to determine whether those did enough, and they did enough with respect to commercial land. They didn't do enough with respect to our need for industrial land. The study in part 2, that demand study, is this? Yeah, the demand study was conducted by Eco Northwest, who looked at all sorts of things, primarily trends and also community desires and what we've had opportunities to get but didn't, places that, employers that came to Eugene and just didn't find what they needed. All these things are compiled in that study, and it determined that we needed a certain portfolio of industrial land based on particular site sizes. Lots of communities are looking at their industrial land needs right now in those terms. And what we end up determining with all this math is that we had an unmet need within our current urban growth boundary line for 2 sites that would be 75 acres or greater, 3 sites between 50 and 75 acres, 2 sites between 20 and 50 acres, and 4 sites between 10 and 20 acres. So those are the sites we set out to find through an expansion. And state law has all sorts of laws and regulations about how an expansion study is conducted. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But the results of the expansion study then are added into this equation in what is Chapter 5. And the result is that when you take all these things into account, we demonstrate through this study that with these expansion areas for those sites, we've met our 20-year need through 2032. Commercial land inside what was already inside the UGB. Industrial land is a combination of what was inside plus these expansion areas. So that package, this is the ordinance and its exhibits. It's a big one. And staff have started sharing this through community meetings, and they're all on the web. Everything's on the web. This is the more robust of the two because it establishes the UGB and it adds land, and those are the 2 big issues under state law. Included in this packet, and by the way, state law requires when you establish or add land to the UGB, it requires county approval as well. So you'll be partnering with the County Planning Commission on at least one work session, and you'll be doing a joint public hearing with them. You'll each be making recommendations to your elected officials. The packet here, this ordinance also includes the assignment of new designations to the expansion areas, the land that's coming in, so Metro Plan designations, new zoning for that land that's coming in, natural resource studies of all that land to make sure, because a lot of it has wetlands, to make sure that even considering those wetlands, they actually can accommodate the kinds of industrial needs that we have. That was very important. We heard from the public, and so although state law doesn't require the city to do that, they did expansive studies of those wetlands and other natural resources. This package includes amendments to your public facilities plan and transportation plans to add projects to show how the expansion areas would be served. And it also creates a new overlay zone for the expansion areas that does a couple of things. It addresses compatibility issues and social justice issues that were identified in terms of bringing that land in. And it takes an important action in terms of preserving that land for its current use until there is an industrial user that comes in and intends to use it for one of these portfolio uses. So all that's included in that packet, and that is available for your review, and we'll talk in more depth about those in coming work sessions. The second package is the residential package. So that ordinance here, this one is very similar in terms of the land supply study. So like the employment land supply study, in this one we again start with our 2012 land supply for residential land. It then looks at the 2032 demand, and this is another one of those points that it includes a lot of assumptions and issues that were addressed through work sessions and even some public hearings, I believe, with the council and perhaps with you, in part to address which population we're using, in part to look at things like the housing mix. So council ultimately directed that the proposal that they get back includes a housing mix of 55 single family to 45 multifamily. That obviously is addressed in that demand, the housing needs analysis. and the capacity of the land that we have. So you can show the land that's in the UGB in terms of, where it is, but you have to actually also figure out how much housing can go on that land. And through a process that involves was that the TRG then, or there was an ECLA housing group, or lots of analysis. The city determines capacity based on a number of factors. So any given property will have a different capacity to accommodate residential land depending on its slope, its size, its elevation, and its metro plan designation. And there are really readable, good tables for figuring out how you determine the capacity of land inside. So once we do the math, the one last factor here is the other demands again. So what kind of public uses take place on residentially designated lands to make sure that we don't overestimate our capacity, knowing that some of that's going to be taken up through public or semi-public uses. And what we determine, just looking at those pieces, is that within the old UGB, or our side of the old UGB, there was not enough low, medium, or high density residential land. So again, through 2014, 2015, you all with the City Council adopted efficiency measures to increase our ability to accommodate residential land inside the urban growth boundary. This is where this package becomes a little simpler than the employment package, because through efficiency measures, including one that has yet to be adopted, one that is actually included in this package, the R2 minimum density efficiency measure that you've heard about, but that'll come to you in part of the package. When you take all those into account, the studies show that there is a sufficient amount of residential land in the right designations within the UGB that's established for jobs, parks, and schools to meet the city's needs through 2032. And I say that with some trepidation. The studies absolutely show that, we believe that they do. You may hear that they don't, but what you probably will hear more of is that these studies are stale, and that there's a real desire on the part of, I don't know who has not expressed this desire, but there's been a real desire on the part of staff and a lot of the community to, through monitoring, check in pretty quickly after you get this UGB acknowledged and consider this kind of the baseline for residential, because we want to look at what new population numbers say and what new growth trends look like to make sure that we really are keeping pace with the real residential demand. We believe that this package does what it needs to do legally, which is to establish that the urban growth boundary has enough land through 2032 based on those studies. But the package also includes policies in the Envision Eugene Comprehensive Plan that will have staff coming back to you with numbers to look at again. And that's particularly important to Home Builders Association and Realtors Associations, and I think the council as well. So again, the consideration of the residential ordinance package will happen on the same timeline through a separate process. So we will have you holding a separate hearing on residential and the jobs, parks, and schools. You'll be making a separate recommendation on the two different packages as well. I mentioned that there, one of the chapters in each of these studies, it identifies the expansion areas. Identification of the expansion areas is a big legal process in and of itself, and for that reason, there are expansion studies, which are in the findings, but are also a big part of the package for the needs for which we're expanding. So there's an expansion study related to industrial land, one related to parks, and one related to schools. Real high-level summary of what those look like. The first thing that they do is they identify a study area. So for employment land, you can see the green is what was in the UGB to begin with, and all of the land outside of that was studied in terms of its suitability for Eugene's needs. Obviously, when you have Bethel School District saying they need a school to serve a particular community, that study area gets small fast for schools. We had a particular need for parks related to the River Road Santa Clara area, and one related to the Bethel area. Both of them really needed a community park, according to our studies, which are in the record. And because those were so site-specific, the study area gets pretty small for those. In terms of, where could we put a community park for the Bethel community? It's got to be in a particular area. For employment, however, every possible site in that expansion area was looked at in order of its priority under the state system. So the state system is set up to require us to attempt to take as little good farmland as possible. And so that's why you first look at priority 1 land, which would be urban reserves, and we don't have any. Priority 2 land, which you can see we have some of, but it's largely committed to other uses. And it goes down through priority 4 land. And to get into a little bit more detail, what we do in all of the first priority land that you look at, so in our case, that second priority land that generally is not currently being farmed, it's used for something else. What we do first is we take out all the land that just simply can't be used for our proposed use. So development constraints is sort of the first filter, and in terms of employment land, constrained land was considered to be the land that was too sloped, that was in a flood hazard area, that was protected for natural resource purposes under statewide planning goal 5, or that was already developed and being used in a way that is likely to make it not available for industrial uses in the next 20 years. So the airport's a good example of land that was dismissed for that reason. So that land is taken out, is dismissed from consideration. And then we also looked at land that couldn't meet the characteristics that were required for the industrial uses that Eugene has set out to attract. We dismissed land that was too far from a freight route, which is the land, in this case, this is just a little sub area, and just to kind of orient you, you can see down in this map, this is the little area that this larger map addresses. So this was just kind of a random choice. And all the land in that area within this particular priority is shown here. This particular area, let's go. This is the same area. So we take out the land that is constrained, and the next map shows areas that would come out for lack of important site characteristics. So like this black land here is too far from a freight route. The purple pieces are sites that would be too small to accommodate our particular size needs. And as you go through this, you end up with land that might possibly work. And then that land is considered in the state's selection process. And as you can see, my little arrow won't show up. Oh, there it is. The land that might work was labeled with numbers for purposes of discussion throughout the study. And this process is conducted throughout the entire study area. And like I said, this is in the expansion study. This particular one comes out of the expansion study for employment. There's a similar one for parks. There's a similar one for schools. And those are all part of the findings in the adoption packet. So in the end, what we end up with is, through the employment, park, and school package, the establishment of Eugene's urban growth boundary down I-5 as instructed, including all the land that was already in the regional growth boundary on our side of I-5, and adding land here for a school, a community park, and all of our industrial needs, and some land over here for a community park for Santa Clara. And that's my run through. I'm happy to answer questions. That's much further in depth than we got with council, but you guys are coming up on this, so we wanted to provide you a little bit more on this one today.
So do you want us to ask questions before we move to engagement?
You want to finish, and then we can...
I think we should finish. We're making good time, so let's do that. But I will just tell you that we're not going to keep you in suspense forever. Your very own binder, which is combined into one, we'll give to you at the end of this meeting, and then you'll have that to start going through at our next commission meeting on Monday. Okay.
They look thrilled. They're like, we're getting ready.
There's
a wagon over there.
It's a wagon, actually, full. So Heather's going to come up now and walk you through the highlights of the community engagement plan.
I can grab a microphone. Hello. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. This is on a short leash, which
You want to try this one?
probably okay. No, I'm good. So attachment A in your packet is the draft community engagement plan. And what I just wanted to do is walk through what's in there. As Terry mentioned, this went to City Council last week and they voted unanimously to approve this. We sent it to you ahead of time. You had the opportunity to review it in early January when our meeting got canceled on the 9th. And then before that, the Planning Commission's Public Involvement Subcommittee had an opportunity to give input, and that was incorporated in here. So the main, I would say the main goals, although there's several bullets there, of the outreach for this next phase is to make sure people understand what is in the UGB proposal and how to give feedback since we're entering this different phase of the process. We've been doing a lot of input gathering over the last 6 years, but now that we're moving into the formal adoption process, you know, there's structure, you're giving testimony, official comment, you know, how does a public hearing process work, those kinds of things. It's going to be more structured. So those are some of our main goals. And then of course, we have an overarching goal as always to provide this information in as many ways as we can, using as many tools as we can. So the first section of this, kind of in the middle of the page, is to talk about the timing, the engagement activity that are really ongoing things that we do. So we have an Envision Eugene newsletter that reaches actually over 600 folks. We use social media. We'll be developing a comment tracking database or log to formally track all of the comments that we'll be receiving. And then, you know, we'll be meeting with those who have requested that we meet with them, whether it's neighborhood groups, relevant boards, and committees. Obviously, we're meeting with you right now, and this is a form of letting people know what's going on through your televised meetings. Other partners and community-based organizations. You know that we already put together a video, and so hopefully you've had a chance to see that, but that at a very high level walks through the adoption proposal. And then we have already published everything, as Terry mentioned. These two sets of materials are on the city's website. And then we're putting together, and this was an idea that we talked about at the Planning Commission Public Involvement Committee. We're putting together what we're calling a community guide. So it still says Urban Growth Boundary Information Packet on here because that's old from, we just recirculated this from your meeting that got canceled, but we changed the wording afterwards. It's really a community guide on what the proposal is and how to give testimony. And so it'll be a packet that will really be available for organizations, whether it's neighborhood associations or the League of Women Voters or the Chamber, whoever is interested in it. And we're trying to compile, we're not giving them this, but what we're doing is we've got a lot of fact sheets, we've got infographics, we've got a new fact sheet that's about how to testify and give comment that's specific to this process. We've got the timeline in there, so really project-specific information. And that will also be available on the web, so somebody can download all of it or parts of it. We've started the community information sessions.
Again, those are more kind of educational. They're not necessarily about input or feedback, but they're about what's in the proposal, what's the new pieces of the proposal that are really ripe for comment, and then also, again, how to participate. And those sessions are throughout the city over the next month. We're also meeting with the Neighborhood Leaders Council tomorrow. And then you may remember that we did specific outreach at the end of the summer outreach this summer, to underrepresented groups in our community that we knew we weren't hearing from. And so we're actually going to circle back with them with the help of Cochito, which is a public involvement firm. Circle back with them, let them know. We did outreach to you about the expansion areas, the Clear Lake Overlay Zone, the multifamily strategies this summer, what did council decide, and then let them know about this upcoming process. And then, like I already mentioned, using our EE newsletter and trying to get that newsletter out to other listservs. So really trying to use existing networks so that we can get the messaging out there, not just through us, but helping other people get the message out there. And then once you all get through your work sessions, the public hearing on March 7th, the 2 public hearings, and then make recommendations to the elected officials, we'll have a new version, as usually is the case when we're going through Planning Commission. And then that version will start through kind of the same process through the City Council. And so at that point, when we have a new version, we'll again update our website. We'll get that information out through the newsletter. We'll also have some print ads again. Let's see, what else? You know, pretty much some of the same efforts that we're doing now. We won't have the community information sessions. We're trying to get as much comment and input in the proposal now through the Planning Commission process. So that's why we're kind of timing more of the community information sessions ahead of your work, so that you can all really hear from the community before we get to City Council. So that is the process. And Terry, do you want me to run through the slides? I just realized I didn't do that at all.
I think we have time to show the video if you all want to see the video. What do you think?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah? I will need the mouse.
Okay.
Thank you. Pull it up. All right. I beg your patience with this mouse. There we go. Oh, it's upside down. That's why it's not working very well. Okay.
Eugene is a great place to live, and this is an exciting time for our city. As part of a project called Envision Eugene, our community developed a vision that seeks to preserve and enhance the things we love about living here. And we are ready to take a big step forward in making that vision a reality. But we need your help. Like all cities in Oregon, Eugene needs to have an urban growth boundary, or UGB, with enough space for 20 years worth of homes, jobs, parks, and schools. After more than 5 years of community engagement and technical analysis, we are ready to officially adopt our own UGB, and we want your feedback as we take this next step. The UGB adoption package includes a number of important parts. It includes the Envision Eugene Comprehensive Plan, with policies governing how land in Eugene is used, transportation investments, economic development, and how we will monitor growth and change moving forward. It also includes the UGB itself, with 2 modest expansions for jobs, parks, and a school. The proposed UGB expansions reflect what hundreds of community members have said that they value: balancing economic development and access to services with the protection of surrounding farm and forest land. We can accommodate all of our housing needs inside the current UGB. This will be done by increasing housing downtown and in areas already planned for medium-density housing, like apartments and condos. Planning along our key transportation corridors will still be an important part of Envision Eugene, providing opportunities for better building design, more complete and walkable neighborhoods, and more housing opportunities as our community continues to grow. It's important for the future of our city that every community member has a chance to participate in this final step, the formal UGB adoption process. There will be 2 sets of public hearings locally, one with the City and County Planning Commissions, and then a second with the City Council and Lane County Board of Commissioners. The City and County Planning Commissions will make a recommendation on UGB adoption, and the City Council and County Board of Commissioners will make the final decision. You are encouraged to speak at these public hearings, whether in favor or against aspects of the proposal. You can also submit comments and questions by email to envisioneugene@ci.eugene.or.us. The UGB proposal establishes a solid plan for how we will grow as a community while keeping Eugene an awesome place to live, work, and play. Now is your opportunity to influence the final decision. Visit www.envisioneugene.org, where you can find the latest information about the adoption process and review all of the adoption package materials. We look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, thanks. That video's up on the website and on social media. Share it, click often, watch often. We have definitely learned that people like to engage with material in different ways. So we've used video 5 times, I think, since we started the adoption process work. Okay, back to this. Heather already went through all of this information. You might see this poster around town. This is what we've designed for the community information sessions, and it looks similar to the ad that's in the Register Guard and the Weekly. And we have printouts. If you want to post them anywhere, we can give some to you.
That'd be great.
We talked about this and this, so yeah, that's the end. So I guess the final thing I would say is that, to reiterate the purpose of this meeting, we're talking about the process, we're talking about the timeline and the community engagement plan. Would welcome your questions about any of that, and then we'll get to work preparing for your content meeting next Monday.
So are there any questions, discussion items from the Planning Commission?
I'll jump in.
Commissioner Borofsky.
Just a couple things process-wise. The Lane County Planning Commission, can you just explain a little bit about their role and the what-ifs? Yeah, you know, perhaps what if Lane County Planning Commission votes not to do it?
Well, it's possible that the Lane County Planning Commission would recommend that it not be adopted. What really matters is what the board does. We would take whatever recommendations the planning commissions make will be the recommendations that go to the electeds.
Right.
If the electeds vote differently, then there's a process that's been established jointly as to how you resolve those issues.
Okay. Okay.
It used to be the MPC process. It's not anymore.
Okay.
But it involves the mayors, and it's codified.
Okay. Yeah, I think I remember that now. And then the other process question would be the role of the Transportation Systems Plan and the adoption of that as it relates to the service needs for the expansion area. How do you plan on doing that? Are you going to have two different sets of amendments that we're going to go through, or can you just talk to that?
I was going to ask the same question. When you talk about that, can you talk about the TSP timeline too? Obviously, it's kind of wrapped up in that question as well.
Yes. So the question's about transportation coordination. So as you all know, the Transportation System Plan has been a little bit ahead of the UGB adoption package. You've already deliberated on it, and it's going to council soon. I'm not sure if it's been scheduled for their public hearing or not, but it will be. We've designed our package to have some placeholder language that says if the TSP is adopted by the time council is considering the UGB, we will amend that plan. Basically, we'll adopt whatever plan is in place. We'll adopt amendments to whatever plan is in place at the time of UGB adoption. So you have seen a project list of things that we know we're going to need to add to whichever plan. Projects on Clear Lake Road, for example, to serve the new employment area. So that's how that's going to work.
So those are in there, regardless, whatever way. The amendments are going to be put into whichever plan is adopted at the time of enactment.
Correct.
Okay. And those won't change based on which plan is in.
The projects themselves will not change. The projects that are needed have been identified. Which table they amend would be different and how they're described. This language is that's in the packet is written with the assumption that the amendments will be made to the new TSP. It describes them according to the numbers that would apply if that's adopted. But council may not be ready to do that in time, and if they're not, we'll amend what we have in place. And so projects, the descriptions would be the same, but the format would be tweaked.
Okay. And then I know we're not getting into the specifics, but I did just have one question about one part of your presentation, Emily, and it's just for me. You talked about the 1.4% as the safe harbor number. Is that on the low end, high end safe harbor?
Well, what happened is that we were not aiming to use a safe harbor for that number. And there was a lot of deliberation about what the right number was. And when council had examined everything that they needed to vote on what they'd like us to use, it was 1.4. They thought that was the right number for our community. Mm-hmm. And then I smiled because that's safe harbor. The safe harbor is, it's that specific. It's the number, I could get more, I can't tell you exactly.
The employment department's forecast
for our area.
1.4 for our area.
So it is what it is. It's a number we can use, and it's based on, some professionals out there that send these numbers out, and it's addressed more specifically in the findings.
Okay, and I just wasn't clear whether
there was
a safe harbor range that, it's like if you fit into between 1.4 and 2.1, you're safe, and I was just wondering if that was
specific to our area.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Nicolello.
So I'm going to ask a process question and then a public engagement question. And first, just wanted to say I got to attend a Sustainability Commission meeting last week, and they had rave reviews about the video and really enjoyed the engagement so far. Sarah Allison, you're a talented voice actor. If the kind of thing doesn't work out.
She's totally. She is. She's good.
You did a great job. But quick question about the process. So for the public hearing we have March 7th, how does that work with both packages and then our subsequent deliberations? Are those public hearings going to be held on the same day? Or are they going to be scheduled out separately? And then how are we communicating that to the community in terms of how they can best get involved?
Yeah, they're going to happen on the same day, and we're still working on our outreach materials about that, although I do have a slide that I used at the community information session last week that's all about the hearing. So the way it'll go is 6 p.m. we'll start a joint work session with both commissions. And then at 7, we'll have the first hearing, which is also joint. And then when that's done, we don't have a time certain, the Lane County Planning Commission would be excused, and then you all would hold your second hearing on residential, the residential package. So we'll communicate that in as many ways as we can. But really the point of the joint work session ahead of the hearings is to explain the process, explain the different pieces of the proposals and all of that. Yeah.
And then in terms of the public engagement piece, I know that Heather, we had discussed putting together a guide, and I still think that's a great idea. One of the things I did notice in Sustainability Commission where people were kind of unsure how to focus their criteria. For example, an individual brought up, well, you know, if Springfield's expanding for industrial, then why do we have to expand as much? So maybe, I realize this is much easier said than done, but throwing in some sort of connection there to state law and how to configure those comments and what is set in stone by the state and then what is able to be adjusted. The committee probably, the committee may be able to help out with that. I realize, once again, that's a much taller order, but is that something that you guys are already thinking about, or?
Yeah, I mean, we do, in the How to Testify document, we do have some discussion about, and actually it was taken from the How to Testify document for the land use applications. But we do talk about, you know, the most effective testimonies directed at the actual approval criteria. Here's what the applications are. Here's where you can find the approval criteria. Of course, if you look at, and we could put a statement in there about this, if you look at, actually I think we may have already, if you look at the findings, our findings, they have to address the approval criteria. And so one can kind of go through and see what all the approval criteria is simply by looking at the findings. And then it's all in one place instead of having to go to different parts in the land use code.
And I know the findings are, while a very fun,
Yeah.
maybe not something everyone will look at. So
Yeah.
maybe we can work together on finding some language that is accessible for the average citizen who might be, or resident who might want to engage with this. But yeah, I really do love the neighborhood guide.
And one of the things that we've talked about a little bit as staff is, you know, although there are 2 separate public hearings, we expect that some people are not going to quite understand which one they're supposed to be talking about at which hearing. And so it may be that we populate the records with testimony from both. We'll have to figure that out. But we want to make sure that we're not, that is not a reason that someone's testimony isn't heard where it needs to be heard.
I think also, too, if I may respond to that as well, 7 p.m. is already a hard time for a lot of folks to meet just because kids, obligations, and such, and then having a hearing that could possibly even be held later that night. I doubt we'd be able to do both in the same night, but we wouldn't want to keep the record open and somebody have to show up at like 9 p.m. for a second hearing. So, you know, that's something to maybe discuss too, although I understand the desire for it to be one solid day.
Yeah, and you know, one thing I didn't mention to you all that you probably are just dying to hear is that this is legislative, not quasi-judicial. So as these guys are putting out lots of information about how to participate, you all may be contacted by constituents, and that's okay. You don't have to worry about ex parte context in terms of the law. That said, you know, hopefully in every one of those conversations, you would encourage the person talking to you to actually submit their testimony, either at the hearing if that doesn't work for them in writing, and staff are going to make it easy, I think, for people to do that, submit written testimony, and maybe they can provide you with some information about where to direct people to shoot off an email or how to do that. But if you're hearing from someone, it would be really helpful if you encourage them to communicate to the whole group, even though they don't legally have to. It's helpful for you all to be hearing the same things.
That's good advice. Are there any other comments? Commissioner Randall.
I just want to say it's nice to see the light at the end of the tunnel on this. And, you know, looking at the timelines and that, I think a lot of this has consumed a lot of the time that I've been on the commission. And so I've been on a while. So it's nice to see it finally coming to completion And I think the urban reserves and the monitoring programs are going to be critical in all of this as we move forward. But thank you for all the work.
Thank you. This is just the beginning, as Emily likes to say.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Are there any other comments? Okay. Thank you, staff, for once again, like Commissioner Randall said, thank you for all of your hard work. I know pulling that together for the submittal was a big feat, so congratulations. And now we will focus our efforts on doing a thorough review. And thank you also for the comprehensive approach to with the public. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we have the next agenda item, and we have Carolyn Burke. The agenda item is Parks and Recreation System Plan Update. And Carolyn, when you talk to us, can you let us know what you would like, what would be the most effective way for us to contribute today, and what you would like from us?
Okay. I have some handouts of the presentation if you find it helpful to follow along. Well, deja vu. So it's great to be here. The last time that I was here at Planning Commission to talk about this project was not quite a year ago. It was in February, and we had completed our first round of community engagement and had published our needs assessment. And so I gave you an overview of all of that. So I'm here today to bring you up to speed on what we've been doing since then and where we're headed. So first, I'll talk a little bit, just remind you about some of the background of this project since it's been about a year. Tell you about the community engagement that we have done since the last time we saw you, and then kind of present the big picture and our what is our long-range vision, and then how we are kind of looking at carving that into our first round of priorities, and then how we some of the options we're looking at for implementation. So there we go. So the goals of this project, whoops. Okay. So really, it's been 10 years since we last did a Parks and Recreation System Plan, and so we're stepping back and assessing the system and seeing where we are. And in doing so, we've come up with these 3 goals. They are to address the current problems that we have with our system, to plan for future population growth and trends, and to create an exciting vision for the future. So we all have I've got more too if you need them. I think we all recognize that we inherited a pretty amazing Parks and Recreation system from previous generations. When we think about the River Path system, the Ridgeline Trail, Amazon Pool, all the community centers that we have. So what are we doing to plan for the next generation? Kind of looking at that question. So we are fairly far along in our process. This is the diagram of the process we've been using since the beginning. We are now in the refine phase where we are really starting to draft the plan. We have a proposed vision that we have gotten feedback from the public on. And so we're at the point where we are identifying priorities and how to move forward. Our timeline is not too unlike that of Envision Eugene, in that we plan on being before council around May and June of next year of this year for adoption of the plan. So we'll see you there. These are the principles that came out of our first round of community engagement and the needs assessment. We kind of were able to boil everything down to these 4 guiding principles that continue to definitely influence the decisions that we make. And they are to care for and make the most of what we have. So not only take care of our assets, but really think about are we utilizing them to their best ability? Are we utilizing the Willamette River to its full potential? Second, to serve the entire community, and this is kind of the equity piece, to make sure that all parts of our community have access to the same services. To create more connections, and that's really about having a physically connected system so that you can get to our different parks and recreation facilities, and to the greatest extent possible, have them connect to each other. And finally, to build better partnerships. And this is really focused on implementation and making sure that we are really leveraging our partnerships and limited funding to the full extent possible. So just briefly, the outreach that we've done in this latest round of engagement, that we kind of kicked it off with a newsletter that was sent to all households in Eugene. It was called Picture Your Parks. We sent out 86,000 of those, and it communicated the findings of our needs assessment as well as the vision moving forward. And then in conjunction with that, we had an online survey where people could tell us what they think about that future vision. Gosh, I'm forgetting how much. We had about 800 respondents to our online survey. Then we did a statistically valid survey in conjunction with that. It asked different questions than the online survey. The statistically valid, it's a telephone survey, really focused on funding and what are dollar amounts that would be supported in the community for what types of improvements. So I can share some of that with you in a moment. We brought our little red trailer out on the road again. You might have seen in the paper on Sunday that we were recognized by Harvard's Ash Center for Innovative Governance, or something along those lines, for kind of being a bright idea for engaging the community in innovation and government. So we're...
Congratulations.
Thank you.
We need to celebrate those
Thank
things.
you. Yes. Yeah. That was great. It has been a very effective tool. I have a video to show you about it in just a moment here. But in this latest round, we went to 10 different locations, engaged 1,500 people just in those 10 locations, but overall we've had 40 events that engage about 4,000 people. So it has been really effective. We also have continued our neighborhood meetings. We kind of do those continually, boards and commission meetings. We just got a draft report of our Latino outreach phase 2. We did a phase 1, and then we did a follow-up phase to kind of dig into some of the initial recommendations. We have that draft report, which I think will be really beneficial to a lot of different outreach efforts in the community. We also, and since we last talked, we have formed an advisory group specific to this project, which is made of 15 different community members from around the community throughout all neighborhoods in Eugene. And they are really helping to inform our decisions. So they act as a sounding board for us. So they just kind of help us work through our recommendations. It's fairly informal. It's a great group, though. So there's a picture of a handful of them. We opted not to go for people that were kind of single focused, like, I am, all about trails, or I am all about swimming pools, but kind of people that maybe had a little bit broader focus. So we have a couple youth, we have somebody from representing health issues, representing Bethel School District and the Parks Foundation, and it's been a great group. We're meeting on Thursday again. And here's the video I want to show you of the pop-up. So if you haven't gotten a chance to see one, this will give you a little sense of what they're like. Hopefully I didn't. Whoop.
It's a sensitive.
It is.
frankly, I think this public outreach is very good because you are where people are, the people that are using the parks. And very frankly, the people who use the parks need to be able to express themselves because not a lot of people are willing to go sit at a city council meeting and wait for public comment period.
Been to a city council meeting, and it was pretty cool. You have to wait a long time. You have to sign up your name to be able to talk. I think the fact that the city puts on events like this is super valuable to the community.
There was a survey we did, and it had a lot of suggestions on it that I don't think I would have thought about doing with parks until I read on it. So it's super cool. There's lots of stuff you can do.
I think it's a great way to reach people. Yeah, you access me that way.
Music and food. Everyone loves music and food. Yeah.
People just go with their regular lives, and you guys, made us pay attention. That's cool.
Need to have more public meetings like this.
Great cities and great parks.
We need these parks for Eugene, but we need these parks for Eugene to become an even greater place for people to live.
All right. So, let's see, do I do that? Yes. So video is a good tool in getting out in the community. We all are just doing more and more of that, and I think it shows the benefits. So so now that we are kind of coming towards the finish line, hopefully here, we're thinking about what the outcomes are of this work, and really there's two. So there's this long range vision, which is 20, 30, 40 years out there, really what's the next generation going to inherit, making sure that we have kind of understand the direction we're going. And then there's carving out the piece of that vision which is most important over the next 5 or 10 years, and what can we realistically accomplish. So, you don't have to read that, but that is kind of the centerfold that was in our newsletter that really does encapsulate what our long-term vision is. And just, I'll give you the Cliff Note version here, which is basically to take care of what we have by renovating all of our facilities that are in poor condition. And there's a number of them: our pools, our community centers, our parks, and our natural areas that all need some renovation. Not all of them, but a good chunk of them. There are areas in town that are underserved, and so building new parks, community centers, and pools to make sure that all areas have access. Enhancing recreation along the Willamette River and some of our other waterways, but particularly the Willamette River is what we have heard a lot of interest in. People love the park system, they love the path system, but they want to be able to get down into the river, and it's difficult to do at this point in time. There aren't a lot of access points along the way, unless you're willing to bushwhack. And improving walking and biking opportunities in all neighborhoods, and this really gets at kind of good access to our facilities. This is one of the most popular things that we can do, because the most common way that people recreate is walking and biking. And so when we put out our surveys and ask people's priority projects, walking and biking is at the top of the list. The final is to make parks safer. And so that is an issue that we have heard more recently, but it's come through loud and clear in our surveys that not in the entire system, but in certain areas of the system, particularly along the river and in more of the urban core, because of illegal activities and some behaviors that are not welcoming, people don't use parts of our system anymore. And this is a concern to the community and to us. So looking at some strategies for that. So I'll go back for a second. So that's like the big, Cliff Note version. I can tell you there are 250 projects that make up that vision. And they cost about $350 million. So again, long-term vision, but we have been able to kind of identify what all those projects are and what they would cost. So it's so important that we prioritize them, and we do a good job of that, so that we're finding out what are the things that we should focus on first. So we developed a set of prioritizing criteria that really reflects everything that we've been hearing in all of our outreach, and addresses things like the fact that we're a growing community, that we are becoming older, proportionately older, that we're becoming more diverse. So kind of some proactive thinking here about how we prepare for a growing, changing community. Looking at the triple bottom line of environmental, economic, and social considerations. And so with this criteria, as well as some phone survey results, I'll just review these briefly. With regard to recreation projects, we asked people, and the words got cut off on here, but the first one is build a combined community center and public pool in an area that is currently underserved. So that was the highest priority project in our survey. Not far behind, though, was renovate and expand existing centers and pools, or centers, I guess. Those two are actually within the, basically the same, because they're within the margin of error. So we have kind of dual priorities, I would say, on the recreation end of things. Fix what you have and serve everybody. On the park side of things, this is again where walking and biking ranked highest, and then renovating and maintaining existing parks and natural areas, and then not far behind that, building new parks and areas that are currently underserved. And then rounding out the list is acquiring additional land, improving access to the river, and building a multi-field sports complex. And there were other write-in answers as well, but those were the specific projects that we were pulling on. So when we look at the projects that we were able to identify as priority one projects, we still come up with a pretty big list, about $81 million. And this is how that list kind of gets broken out, with a large amount of that funding going towards renovated pools and community centers. Those are obviously the larger ticket items. And then fairly equal amounts being spent on new parks, renovated parks, and then some of the other things like safety improvements, which is primarily lighting projects, as well as some vegetation reduction. We have some other strategies that are not capital related as well. And then trails, paths, and access. So I think it's clear that we probably need to whittle this list down a little bit more. And so we're working on some strategies for how to do that, and I'll tell you about that during next steps. And this one, I don't think I'll go into detail since you have it before you, but this is just kind of what some of the projects, priority one projects that were identified, look like based on our different planning areas. We for over 10 years now, we have used these planning areas as a way to kind of understand equity in the system, and they work pretty well for us, so we're sticking with them. But you can see, like, in the city central and southeast Eugene, most of the projects are about renovation, because those facilities were built a long time ago and they're in poor condition now and need some rehabilitation. Whereas in Willackenzie and River Road, there's some new projects on that list, because particularly in River Road, Santa Clara, we own a lot of land, but have not been able to develop that land into functioning parks, primarily because we do not have the maintenance dollars to take care of it once it is developed. So this operating and maintenance question gets kind of locked together with the capital funding issues. So won't spend too much time there. And then there are some projects that just kind of affect everywhere citywide, such as restrooms. In previous surveys, that was the #1 ranking priority of the community, and I can tell you in every presentation I give, people want to talk about restrooms and the lack of availability of them. So that's something that we have on our list and know we need to address. Also, just basic accessibility items like benches, particularly for seniors and walking and things like that. Places to rest really become important. Neighborhood greenways is something that we've been talking a lot with Public Works Transportation, and what have been called bicycle boulevards in the past, and in the transplan. We've talked about working together with them and kind of prioritizing access to parks and making sure that not only are they those streets good for bicycle movement, but they're good for pedestrian movement, and they're just kind of become a recreational amenity in themselves. And so we've been having some good conversations around that. And partnering with the school district on playground upgrades and turf field renovations. We do co-locate a lot of our facilities, so all of our turf fields are located on 4J property. We and some of them are up for renovation, and so we need to keep up with that. And then also we rely on many school playgrounds as a neighborhood park. And so we don't want to let those playgrounds go uncared for and only focus on our parks. So we really want to work better with the school district around those amenities. Okay. Finally, I want to talk about implementation. And there's basically two tracks that we are talking about when we talk about implementation. I've alluded to them already, but there's the capital side of things, and then there's the park maintenance and operations side of things. They come from different funding sources, so we have to think about them a little bit differently. So first, I'm going to start with the capital. We need to identify our priority projects, and I just kind of told you how we are doing that. And then we need to look at, well, what's the feasibility of funding options? So we did a telephone survey in October, and we asked people very specifically what they would support as far as dollar amount. We asked them, and we tested 4 different scenarios, a 30, a 50, a 70, and a whopping $100 million scenario. And you can see that support kind of drops off after 50 pretty abruptly. But we were clear about what types of projects they would get in each of those scenarios and how much it would cost the individual homeowner. So they had good information to base their answers on. This is not the kind of survey that we would go forward and base a future bond measure on. We would need to do more targeted polling, but this just gives us kind of a good indication of maybe where people are right now. So, and then when we think about what are the funding sources, currently our primary funding sources for capital are the 2006 bond measure. We have $5 million of that remaining primarily for acquisition, system development charges, and donations, partnerships, and grants. And we have worked with the Trust for Public Lands, which is a national nonprofit, to do a report of what are the other funding sources that could be available to us. And I don't think I included that in your packet, but if you wanted to see it, I could be happy to send that to you. But by and large, what is the most common, popular, and reasonable approach is a capital bond. It's kind of how big capital projects tend to be funded in this state. So now I'm going to move to the next track, which is the park maintenance track. When we think about, well, what are the services that need to be addressed through additional park maintenance funding, we've identified about a $2.3 million in addition to what we have today is really needed to adequately care for and steward our existing system and provide for a little bit of growth. And that pie chart kind of shows how that would be broken out. And again, this is an annual number. but a good chunk of it would go toward park safety and security, and that is hiring additional personnel to be on the ground. We have a pilot project of park ambassadors. We would make that year-round. We would supplement it with a park ranger program and one full-time dedicated police officer. Then there's also looking at restoring some of the maintenance services that we cut in the recession and have not been able to restore, like opening restrooms that were closed. The orange piece of the pie is actually, we wanted to build in just a little bit of money for future park maintenance so that we could, and what that would represent is basically adding 4 additional neighborhood parks and a phase 1 of a community park, because we want to be able to start using some of the SDCs that we already have, and if we have additional O&M dollars, that can really kind of unlock the door to that funding. So we wanted to build in a little bit more money to be able to take care of those new facilities. And then there's also looking at stabilizing some of the natural areas that we've acquired with the 2006 bond measures, like doing things like wildfire mitigation, making sure that we have not a lot of overgrown, next to property lines and things like that. And there's fencing and just a number of things that have to happen there. And then illegal activity response, that's what we pay, what we currently spend to clean up illegal camping. And that just comes out of the budget that should be spent doing normal park maintenance activities. So kind of reimbursing that. So we asked people what they thought about paying for these services, and at the $2 million annual level, we had 71% support, and at the $2.5 million, we had 64% support. And then again, thinking about, well, how are they currently funded and what are the future options? Currently, we are mostly general funded. However, we also do have access to stormwater funds, primarily for natural areas. And so when we look at what are the new funding sources, again, Trust for Public Lands helped us look at the options, and it does seem to boil down to these two, which would be either an operating levy, which would need to be renewed every 5 years, or ongoing park utility fee. So, so this is information that we presented to the City Council when we were last there in November. We plan on going back to them in March, probably March 15th, I think is our date. And at that time, we are planning on presenting them with a series of scenarios to clearly illustrate the options that lay before them, so that they can see if we don't do anything, if we don't add any new operating or capital dollars, this is what that future looks like. If we add an operating levy, this is what that future looks like, and have a series of 5 of those kind of running the gamut. We won't ask them to make a decision at that point probably until we do some additional polling, but our point of the scenarios is to really kind of clearly illustrate the pros and cons of the different choices we see in front of us. And we'll be developing those, or those are in process. I would have loved to have had them for you today, but they weren't quite ready. So, so that's where we are. Commissioner Taylor, you asked, or Chair Taylor, I guess I should say, I'm out of practice. You asked kind of what I would be looking from you. I think some general comments about the direction that we're headed would be welcome. There actually probably is not a formal role for the Planning Commission in the process. Actually, but you will see something coming towards you soon. We tonight are initiating a Metro Plan amendment with the City Council that will come through you, but it is to make a change to the Metro Plan that requires park plans to be land use documents. And it's why the last one was remanded, because it was not adopted as a land use document. We have no purpose or need for our aspirational park plans to be land use documents. And the only reason that well, there's just this item in the Metro Plan that requires that they be. And so we will be initiating amendments to change that for Eugene. And so that will be before you, and we can discuss the substance of that a little bit more later. And Neil Bjorklund is taking the lead on that. But because it wouldn't be a land use document, there's no formal process, but thinking about integrated planning, we obviously want to hear your comments and incorporate those. So I think that will do it.
Okay. Commissioner Mills, and then Commissioner Nicolello.
Carolyn,
Thank you.
It's great to see you here.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
And, excellent presentation.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks.
I had a couple of quick questions just to see if I can understand.
Yep.
On your pie chart, you mentioned that your park maintenance dollars help to unlock SDC dollars. That's what I...
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
provide a little bit more on that?
So we currently have, we've been collecting system development charges as properties develop for the purposes of building new parks and some smaller portion to renovate older parks. We haven't been able to utilize the portion that is allotted for building new parks because we can't afford to maintain the parks once we build them. And so if we can have some additional operating and maintenance funds, we therefore can spend some of those SDC dollars to build some new parks.
Understood.
Yeah.
Second question, and then this is my last question. You also mentioned as one funding possibility a park utility fee.
Yes.
What would that look like?
Well, potentially it would.
Where would it be?
It would be on potentially, and this hasn't been approved by any stretch of the imagination, but it could be on on your e-web bill, similar to the stormwater fee. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Nicolello.
Well, first, I just wanted to say, amazing job on outreach, and congratulations on getting recognized by Harvard. That's really cool.
Thanks.
I also wanted to say, fantastic video. It was a good day for videos in this meeting today. And I only recognized 2 names from your advisory group, which is also fantastic. And you had youth representation, which is so important because we want to have 880 cities where folks of all ages can access everything. So that is so great. A few comments.
Yep.
So the first is just thinking ahead in the future, because you mentioned maybe some of your work becoming a model for outreach, which I think is an excellent idea. What was your outreach budget, if you have those numbers with you now? If not, I can budget with you now.
What was the outreach?
What was your budget for public involvement and outreach?
I would need to get back to you on that.
I will make a note to email you.
Okay.
And then would you consider ever putting together a case study of what works, what didn't, and some other information about it? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
The second question I have is on equity, and I was part of the original Latino outreach efforts through a class at the University of Oregon, so I was really excited to see.
You were in that class?
Yeah, back in
Awesome.
2015.
Okay.
Which sounds so long ago, but that's because I aged 5 years. So some of the comments that we got from folks was some of the comments that we got from folks in that community was making spaces easier for informal gatherings, such as having barbecues and tables, restrooms, lighting, and then signs that are bilingual.
Yeah.
That's being moved forward as part of the maintenance updates.
It's being moved forward in 2 tracks, I would say. Some of it, most of it actually doesn't need to wait for this plan to be adopted. And so actually we're currently working on the bilingual signage. And then there are a number of other recommendations in there that we followed up with in phase 2, which is the report that just came out. And basically what we were looking for there was, okay, so we got some general information that people want a place for family gatherings. Well, where? And what exactly are the facilities that you need? And so we just took a deeper dive in phase 2, and we'll have that report finalized probably in a week or two.
Great.
Yeah.
The other question as part of that, because this did come up in the outreach, was with park safety, also making sure that there is a recognition of potential fears of profiling, and that was expressed really heavily in outreach. And so I know that, as budget money gets allocated towards that, just as a very general comment, that there is a historical relationship between certain communities and the police that, does need to be recognized. And so I'm not sure quite how that fits in the system plan, but just as a general comment.
Yeah, we've talked about that.
The final question I have is, so you mentioned the $300,000 for the illicit activity response. And I want to recognize that there is a very delicate balance that the Parks and Recreation departments have had to walk, because you're oftentimes the first line between certain communities and between, that kind of activity. And so one of the questions I had is, are you planning on identifying more funds to go through that? And then have you also thought through strategies on how to maybe make those spaces more safe? For example, like having sharps disposal boxes at parks and things like that. Though I understand there's also, of course, a message that sends that people might not feel welcome with those as well.
Right.
So it's again that balance that's very hard.
It is a very delicate balance. We actually have a working group, an internal working group that has some recommendations about how to proceed, and I'm not not the best person to talk about it, but I think we have done a lot to educate our staff about the homeless situation in the community, about how to best interact with people, how to protect themselves. So we've done a lot of kind of internal training, but I think the $300,000 represents really the funding that we feel we need to be able to continue the cleanup efforts without letting the rest of the park system degrade. And then the suggestions, I'd have to look about the sharps container suggestion. I wouldn't be surprised if it was in there, but I'm not exactly sure. So I would be happy to send that to you if you're interested in it.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for your responses.
Yeah.
So I want to just follow up with one comment. Also, I appreciate that awareness with internal staff, just the understanding that a homeless community is not one ubiquitous community.
Yes.
Meaning it's a very diverse group. So
Yes.
I love staff's effort in terms of identifying, not just clumping homeless into one population group.
Yeah.
Commissioner Randall.
Well, I wanted to echo Commissioner Mills's comments that it's good to see you
Nice
again,
to see you.
and a little bit of deja vu there.
Yep.
Good presentation. I really appreciated the information that you gave us. I did make a note for the Pick committee. The 2 words were music and food. So, just we might want to file that away as we do our public outreach. But I also wanted to just thank you for the pie chart in breaking out how much of your budget does go to the illicit activity, as well as other areas, but to separate that out, just so that we know, as we see, what you deal with in the parks, on just how much funding goes to addressing those issues, so that we can decide how we want to proceed. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you for the presentation, and I understand that we don't really have a role as far as implementing this, but this is a good feedback session for you guys. So I've got a couple of questions and comments. One being, I was one of the people that was called for the survey.
Oh.
So I kind of have a good feel for it.
The most recent one in October?
The October one, yeah.
Okay.
The dollar amount one, and it was very extensive. It was about 15 minutes on the phone with a lot of different breakdowns, and he didn't realize that I was an ex-budget committee member and a planning commissioner, so I had all the right answers. So a couple of questions regarding the capital budget. So you mentioned that the most of our capital budget or the capital needs is done from the park bonds and SDCs
Big projects,
and that. But isn't there money in the capital improvement plan for existing structures? I've looked in the past, and so part of the capital budget
There is.
For Campbell Senior Center. Those types of things are in the CIP that's been adopted and the one that will be coming forward, correct?
Correct. So we do have a share of general funds that come to parks every single year for capital projects. And basically those are to fix things.
Right.
You know, replace the kitchen in Campbell Center, which was not functioning anymore, to fix roofs, to fix broken sidewalk, irrigation systems. So that's generally how those dollars get spent.
Okay. And then going to that point, the capital budget some of the capital budget has been being used to help fund the new city hall. So do you see an impact on the park systems by the money that is not being done? You also mentioned that most major capital projects that a city does is done by bonding, and the city has chosen not to do City Hall by bonding. Do you see an impact on the park system by the taking away of some of that money for the City Hall project?
I don't believe that the parks budget has been reduced as a result of the City Hall project, so no.
Okay. The next thing that I got out of your presentation was in the $2.3 million needed for O&M for parks. You said one of the areas that you would like to have would be a full-time officer. It's my opinion that shouldn't come out of parks money. That should come out of the police department's budget. It's in this, and this is my opinion. It's the police department's job to police the city of Eugene, and they have a budget. It's the largest percentage of the general fund budget is the police budget, and to say that we have to use parks money to fund police officers, I don't think is correct. So if you were just my last take on what a police officer costs, your 2.3 million could drop down to 2.15 million, because a uniformed officer is about $150,000 a year. So I don't think that should be something going forward. That's my personal opinion. I think that is the job of the police department, and they should dedicate it. They've dedicated ones for downtown. That's a need that the community sees. I don't think it should come out of parks maintenance budget, personally.
I understand that, and I think what I was trying to paint is kind of this holistic picture of what we mean when we say increased park security and we do believe that a dedicated officer is needed to back up those ambassadors and those rangers, in situations that are beyond their abilities. And so I'm sure there's more room for discussion about exactly where that fits into the budget.
And then the last thing, as far as funding's going forward, if we're looking at $2.3 million of O&M, and that to me entitles bringing on new FTEs. Have you also looked at the possibility of contract workers for a lot of these, rather than bringing on FTEs, which bring on higher long-term costs? That the cost of an FTE goes up quicker than what the income usually does. That's one of our problems with our sustainable budget. So I'm not saying that FTEs and city employees aren't there, but I think that in parks maintenance, there is definitely an opportunity for contracted type things. Is that something that was looked into?
I think it's something that we utilize to an extent. We have to balance the union concerns. and make sure that we're within the lines of our contract with them. But we certainly have been using contract employees for more like focused efforts. For instance, renovation of or restoration of a natural area that could be daily maintenance, but actually we're just going to hire some people and turn it into kind of a capital project.
Right.
So I think I can pass that along,
No, I just wanted to have it put out there. I mean, there's certain things that, you talked about a fire, knocking down brush in open spaces, things like that.
We do use contracts for that.
That type of stuff is, I would hope that is being looked at.
We do use contracts for that type of work, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So I think, why don't we take one more comment, and then we'll follow up with next steps with you. Yeah, Commissioner Nicolello. Is there anybody else?
I did think of, I'll go super quick
Yeah.
then. I did think of a very small land use connection, just based on some feedback I've gotten from some folks. So it sounds like Parks and Recreation's departments do consider schools as part of your open space. So kind of an interesting thing, but I don't think that the land use code does, and sometimes that does interface with criteria that folks have to use when they're developing a project. So maybe just connect with land use really fast on that, because I've heard from folks before that that's interpreted as you have to be next to a park.
I see.
And so that is kind of an interesting discrepancy, and I wonder if, especially as I know as a member of the public, I live next to South Eugene High School, and I consider that to be very beautiful open space. So kind of maybe thinking about that and thinking about that quick land use code connection. Not quite part of the strategic plan, but certainly worth.
I can follow up on that. We basically have a map that shows what areas are served and what are not, and the schools play a role in that, so we can share that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just had one more comment. On your draft capitalization project list, I think there is one very important item that does interact with the Planning Commission, and that's the Wetlands Mitigation Bank. That is going to be very important to implementing the industrial lands. A lot of those lands that we're planning on for expansion are going to need mitigation, and I think it's very important. I think I would put that at a high priority, and I think that the using the triple bottom line with the economic part of it, it's hard to put a lot of these parks and things a direct nexus to economic development, but that one is
has
right
it
there.
for sure.
So
It's a real win-win, so we're
that.
discussing that.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. And in terms of next steps, do you think you would make one more presentation or two more presentations to Planning Commissioner, or is this a lot? Should we just be paying attention offline?
I'm aware that May and June are coming quickly, and so I'm not sure if I'll get here again. If I'm requested, I will be here. I think that what would be most useful, and I'm happy to facilitate this in any way, is to pay attention on March 15th when the scenarios discussion starts with the City Council. And if at that point you have questions or think that the Planning Commission wants to weigh in just as their own body, then I'd be happy to follow up.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I was going to prioritize because we did have two people from the public. They came in and they have now since left. So that agenda item is now no longer. So we have one item left under the subsection items for commission and staff is other items from commission. Commissioner Borowski.
Yeah, I attended the public hearing on the Measure 49 initiative or Measure 49 claim that has gone before the City Council. I believe the record is going to be open through Friday for comment. And no, it closed last Friday?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. I think it goes through till Friday. Just for staff, if somebody can get a message to Robin, I think it would behoove us to have the the record that is there, the public comment records forwarded to us, because there were some interesting arguments, both sides, as to whether or not this claim is valid or not. And I think it has implications going forward as far as other land use decisions that are in front of us. So I would hope that we could see those, just so that the rest of you, I mean, I've been brought up because I testified and was in the loop on the record.
Thank you. Commissioner Nicolello.
So for the public involvement subcommittee, just wanted to let you know that we're going to be tackling our work plan and really getting started on some of our items. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is going to be establishing a process for developing a framework of public participation principles, and then we're going to bring this forward to you guys so we can work and brainstorm together on what exactly is a good framework for public participation principles and what should we use to really be something that guides our efforts. And as a good example of that, the Parks and Recreation System Plan has its goals of what it hopes to achieve, and it's a very similar thing for us as the Goal 1 citizen involvement. When we do public participation, what are the goals and the frameworks that we want to keep in mind, so we can strive to be as successful as possible doing that. So we hope to come to you with a draft suggested process soon, and go from there. So any questions about that?
Thank you. Are there any other commissioner items? No, and it looks like Terry stepped up. Do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, because Robin had to go. I'll just forward your comments on to Robin.
Okay. Other than that, are there any other comments from staff?
Well, more for the public. Just your next meeting is next Monday on the urban growth boundary package, and then there's a meeting that got added to your agendas for February 6th, and that'll be an update on the capital improvements program, the CIP. Public Works staff will be coming over to present to you on that, and an update on next steps for South Willamette.
Will there be people from finance at the CIP meeting as
It's
well?
the Public Works finance person. His name's Michael Streepy, who will be presenting.
So don't forget, somewhere there are these binders you're supposed to pick up on your way out.
Yes,
and it looks
we'll
like
get
Heather,
you before you leave the room.
Heather has some items too before you leave the room. So the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.